Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you today to talk about podcast advertising on Spotify Ad Studio. Happy first day of June, coming right off of a holiday weekend. We're excited to talk about some podcast advertising. So my name is Rochelle Sanchirico, and I am the global head of SMB marketing here at Spotify, which means I spend all of my time thinking about how to improve the experience for our small and medium-sized business and agency advertisers. A couple of housekeeping notes before we dive into the content today. First, we are going to be keeping video and microphones off just to ensure that there's no unintended interaction today. There's a lot of people on the call, so we want to make sure that everyone can hear the content. But we do want to make sure that we're able to answer your questions. So if you'll notice at the very bottom, there is a Q&A icon. If you have any questions, please put those in there. And we're really excited to answer those at the end of the session today. So let's dive right into it. At Spotify, we like to start many of our meetings talking about what we're listening to. And so I thought it was a good time to highlight one of my very favorite podcasts. It's an oldie but a goodie called You Must Remember This, and it's stories of old Hollywood. The host, Karina Longworth, does an amazing job of researching these really immersive stories that draw you in. The most recent season was about the careers of Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin and how those intersected over time, how their careers developed. Just really fantastic listen. I highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out before. But our playlist today is here on this slide. So we're going to talk about the evolution of podcast advertising. So how we got to where we are today. Then we're going to talk about how our advertisers are effectively reaching their audience on our platform through podcasts and how you can do it too. And then my esteemed colleague, Stacey Wallace, is going to take you through a demonstration of Ad Studio so you could get a better sense of our self-serve platform and how easy it is to use. And then she's also going to talk about what's coming next on Ad Studio. So we are constantly trying to create experiences that make our platform more effective for advertisers in addition to creators and listeners. And so we're going to be talking about some new features that we have coming up. And then finally, we'll have that Q&A that I talked about. All right, so starting out with the evolution of podcast advertising. Many of you, especially if you're marketers, know what this graph is. This is a Google Trend graph, so it is just looking at the number of search queries for a particular term over the course of time. And so in this case, we're looking at the term podcasts, and you can see that the word podcast actually came into our ecosystem in 2004. It's the first time it was really mentioned and embraced, and some people have been doing things that were very similar to podcasting prior to that. But you can see in the early 2000s, there was that level of interest, but it was more lightly produced content, more niche content. And so that's more what it was. And what you can see is then in around 2014, we see the entry of a podcast called Serial. And that was something that really took off. It was a spin-off of This American Life and really captured the hearts and minds of people, became a really big boon, not just for podcast listening, but also podcast advertising. Podcasters and advertisers saw how they could work together in order to build listenership, but also help advertisers get their messages out there. And you can see that just interest in podcasting has really ballooned since that entry of Serial. So now, where are we? Podcasting is at the center of digital audio growth. 126 million Americans listen to podcasts. That's more than a third of the US population. And they're not just dipping in and out. On average, they listen to podcasts 52 minutes per day. They're really spending time. They're immersing themselves into the podcasting content. And on the right side, you can see that, we're always looking at what people are doing on mobile as our people are shifting more and more to mobile devices. And recently was the first time that the majority of the time that people were spending on their mobile devices was actually interacting with audio content. So average mobile time spent per day, 55 minutes on audio, where you have like 50 on social, 39 on video, 24 on gaming. So audio is a great place to be if you want to find that immersed audience and ensure that your message is heard. So podcast advertising has evolved alongside the podcast content and listening. So in those early 2000s that we talked about, what you were seeing were baked in or burned in ads. And what that means is that the ad was actually created as part of the original audio file. So the content was created, an ad was created, and it was burned into that content. So it was one audio file. Then in the 2010s, you move to dynamic ad insertion. And what that means is when a podcast was downloaded, that was when the ads were actually inserted into that audio file. So, and you also see the move not just to like an ad in the middle of the audio content, but you would have pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll advertising. And so with this dynamic ad insertion, it was really focused around the download. So at the time of download, these ads would get inserted and they would make a lot of sense and be relevant and fresh at that time. But once that download happened, it was locked in. So if somebody listened or downloaded a podcast and then ended up listening to it 6 months later, they were listening to an ad from 6 months ago. And so we have become big proponents of the technology called streaming ad insertion. So we've led this revolution of podcast advertising with the streaming ad insertion technology. So we're not focused on attaching those advertisements at time of download because we're a streaming platform. So the ads are actually inserted at time of stream. So in real time, essentially, which means that your listeners, the audience that you've selected for your campaign are getting your most current relevant ad that you want to be served at that time. And relevance isn't the only benefit, though. It's really, you get so many benefits from streaming ad insertion, especially what you can see in the right bar here, the reporting and insights. We just have much more information with streaming ad insertion as to the listener's interaction with that advertisement. So you can get confirmed ad impressions, you can get unique reach, frequency, demographic data like age and gender, and the really critical device delivery to get a better sense of who your audience is and where they're engaging with your advertisement. Spotify is the #1 podcast player in the US. We actually surpassed Apple last year in 2021 as far as listenership. And you can see that gap is anticipated to continue to grow based on this eMarketer data as we go into out years. And we're really thrilled to be this strong podcast player in the space. There are other podcast players out there, but it does have a tendency to be a lot more dispersed when you get into some of the smaller players. So the value of podcast advertising and the reason why we are so excited about it here at Spotify is it gives us the opportunity to have brands and advertisers land their message in this highly engaged environment. If you are on a website and seeing advertisements, chances are you're seeing many of them at a time, and it's very hard to actually capture someone's attention when you have one of 9 ads on a page. content. However, when they are in the audio environment, your message is the only thing that they're listening to at that time. They are immersed, they are engaged. And if you think about it, the reason why people listen to podcasts are because they want to stay up to date, they want to be entertained, and they want to learn new things. And those are areas where people have a tendency to be deeply immersed and listening to what they've chosen to engage with as far as audio content. So who are these people that are listening to podcasts? We know a lot of people are listening to podcasts on Spotify, but who are they? So our podcast audience is a highly coveted audience. And so we're excited to give advertisers the access to these audiences and get to actually engage with them. So in general, they're pretty young as compared to other audiences you can reach through different platforms. So about 66% of our podcast audience are between the ages of 16 and 34. So they are a young audience, they're multicultural, and they're also affluent. So they have a lot of buying power. They can be really hard to reach in other places. So of course, our podcast audiences are out there and they are engaging with other types of content, but 86% of them who are listening or who are engaging with video streaming platforms are doing so on an ad-free subscription platform. So they are not receiving any brand messages through that platform. It can be really hard to engage with them there. Whereas within our podcast platform, they are being served brand messages. So it's a great place to reach this really affluent and hard to reach audience. And then finally, the most important thing is they have really deep connections with this content and with these hosts. And so that means they take action when they hear ads. 63% of our audiences said they immediately went and took action after hearing a podcast ad. So they're listening, they're engaging, and they're taking action. So it's interesting, thinking about these advertisers or these listeners one by one, but how can you reach them at scale? So historically, a lot of podcast advertising was bought and sold on a title by title basis, which means that you're not really buying an audience, you're buying alignment with a certain type of content because you're deciding to buy podcast advertising aligned with a particular show or a particular host. That doesn't really necessarily match with the audience that you're trying to reach. So it can be really challenging to get the precision that you need to get your message to the right people. So that's why we've put together the Spotify Audience Network, which makes it possible to buy podcast ads based on the target audience versus focusing more on that title by title content and allows you to scale your buy. So speaking more about the Spotify Audience Network, you can reach listeners both on Spotify, so the ones that are listening within our Spotify platform, or off of Spotify. So we've worked with and developed relationship with other advertiser or other platforms, other podcast platforms. And so you are able to target your audience and get them out there, not only on Spotify, but in other premium places where people are engaging with and listening to podcasts. And you can see many of so we have our own podcast studios in-house, really high-end content from The Ringer, Gimlet, Parcast. And then we also engage with these enterprise podcast publishers and creators that you see here. And so how do you actually go about, if you're convinced about the audiences out there and the medium of podcasts seem to make a lot of sense for you, how do you go about actually creating a podcast ad in Spotify Ad Studio. I can tell you as a marketer, 10 years ago, I was looking to start advertising on podcasts and it just seemed overwhelming. The minimums were very high. It was a very, very manual process. And what we've done is set out to try to fix that through Spotify Ad Studio in order to create a lot more accessibility for advertisers of all sizes. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Stacey Wallace, who is going to walk us through a demonstration of Ad Studio. Stacey?
Cool. Thank you, Rochelle. My name is Stacey. My role is that I lead our product team for Spotify Ad Studio. So that means that I'm spending my days really understanding what you all, the advertisers, want out of our advertising platform. Then I'm partnering really closely with our designers and our engineers to build that functionality into Ad Studio and to make sure that Ad Studio is as performant and engaging, as powerful as it can be. Go on to the next slide here. Oops, sorry. Got a little bit too excited there. So like Rochelle, I'm a pretty avid podcast listener. I listen to a lot of news podcasts every single day, maybe too many, but I have to say that my favorite, if I were to choose, is Pop Culture Happy Hour. It's just one that brings me joy every time that I listen to it. It's a podcast. I think it comes out about 5 days a week. I get a lot of recommendations about what TV shows or movies I should watch or what music I should be listening to. The hosts just have really great rapport, great dialogue, great recommendations. So really recommend this one. It's a pretty quick listen, about 20 minutes, and it just brings me really constant joy. But I'm not here to go on about my favorite podcast. I'm actually here to show you Ad Studio and show you how to book a podcast ad. And so I think, Rochelle, I'll take over the screen right now. And let's just jump right in. All right, so you'll start by going to ads.spotify.com. There are so many amazing resources on here for you to get started with podcast advertising. So you can see here that if you want to learn more about podcast ads generally, just come here to this page. Lots of tips about creative, our audience. If you want to read some case studies, you can go through here too. Really recommend that you can use this as your home base and your starting point for anything Spotify advertising related. But I'm going to jump into my Ad Studio account now to start building the ad. So let's say that my business is Spotifresh. So I've already created my account before. I'm a meal kit delivery service. So if you're familiar with services like HelloFresh or Blue Apron, something along those lines, and I want to create my first podcast ad in Ad Studio. So I'm just going to start right now. Okay, so I'm going to name my campaign. You can see here that if you've used other digital advertising platforms today, a lot of this should look pretty familiar, especially with this campaign, ad set, and ad hierarchy. So let's say I want to run a campaign for this summer, it's a summer 22 promo. And let's say we want to run a brand campaign. So I'm going to select a brand, product, or organization here, and I will move on to next. So this is where things start getting pretty fun. I'm going to build my ad set. So let's see, I want to put this in podcast, so the audio. My target audience, I'm going to stick with, let's say, US 25 to 44. One thing I want to point out is that as I'm building this ad, I'm going to be keeping an eye on this right side here. This is going to give me guidance about my CPM, as well as my likelihood to deliver my budget. So now you can see that I have the choice to place my ad within music or podcast. This is a podcast demo, so I'm going to stick with podcast for right now. But just so you know, if I were to choose music, I would have the option of running an audio ad or a video ad. Currently, we're only supporting audio within podcast, but definitely looking into video options sometime in the future. So you can see that now my CPM is at about $25, budget likelihood is high, so I'm going to keep on going. One really important thing to call out, actually it's a really exciting thing, is that these ads will be delivered on Spotify and off Spotify. So Rochelle told you about our dynamic ad insertion ads that are part of the downloaded ads off of Spotify, as well as streaming ad insertion, which play on Spotify. So when you advertise with Spotify Ad Studio, we actually get both. All right, so on the platform side, if I were to choose all here, that means that my podcast ads will play on mobile, which is iOS and Android, desktop, and smart speakers. Now, if I wanted to limit that to just mobile, I could choose that as well. But for me, the thing I want to do is really maximize my audience and reach. So I'm going to choose all of these platforms. All right, now I'm going to choose my industry. So this helps make sure that my ad doesn't get played alongside my competitor ads. So let's say HelloFresh was also running an ad. This would just make sure that my ad doesn't get played within the same ad break as a direct competitor. So I'm going to select food and beverage services and food delivery services. All right, so this will make sure that my ad gets the space that it needs. In addition, if I had brand safety controls and I didn't want my ad to play alongside certain sensitive topics, I could choose that right here. So you can see here that we have a number of different sensitive topics that I could choose. For me, I don't have particular concerns about the type of content that my ad's going to play against. So I'm just going to keep this selection here clear because I don't need that. I want to maximize my audience. In addition, I could also home in on the type of content that my advertisement is going to play against. So here, there are ads that are, say, specific to like food and drink or healthy living, which could be really great content for my ad. For this campaign, I'm really more interested in reaching my general audience. So I'm not going to choose the content. But if I were, you can see here that the CPM is going to go up. And then in certain cases too, the budget delivery likelihood would go down because I am narrowing my audience as I choose this. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep this clear as well. All right, so now on to the schedule and budget. So I have a budget of about $10,000 for this campaign. So let's say I want to run a $10,000 campaign. The minimum campaign size here is $500, so I can put any amount over $500. And this is going to be a summer campaign, so I want to start it relatively soon, so in a week, and let's say I want this to run through the end of August. All right, I'm going to keep an eye over here. Everything's still looking good. And then I'm going to go with also Spotify's recommended frequency cap, so I'm going to leave that here as well. I could edit my specific controls here if I wanted to. All right, so finally, I'm going to edit my audience. So this is podcast ads today are available for audiences in the US. That is a good match for my target audience for this case. Although if I wanted to narrow or target something more narrow, let's say like a DMA, I could go ahead and input those specific locations. I do, however, want to narrow down my age as well. So my target audience is going to be, let's say 25 to 44. So I'll make sure I'm only reaching those folks, and I want to reach all genders. Great, so I think that things are looking good so far. So I'm going to just double check this audience sizer here. I'll see my estimated impressions and frequency. All looking good, so I'm gonna go on to the next step. All right, this is my favorite part here. This is where I'm actually going to build out that ad and think about my creative. A huge value of advertising on Spotify Ad Studio when you're running a podcast campaign is that our in-house production crew is going to produce that ad for you. So I think many of us who have listened to podcasts before know that podcast ads tend to be really high quality, really engaging, and they drive really great results. So we have a really high bar for the creative quality for podcast ads. So as of right now, if I were to run an ad in Ad Studio, actually what I'll do here is I'll name that ad. I won't force you all to see me type in every field here for this demo, but I'll talk you through it. And then I'll add my advertiser name here. So I'm Spotted Fresh. And so this preview here on the right is what your listener is going to see when they listen to the ad. So you can see there's this little blurb here, says sponsored by Spotted Fresh. This image here is going to be populated with the podcast image here. And then that podcast name is going to appear below this sponsored by tagline. This is actually going to change in the coming months. We have some really exciting updates that I'll talk about related to some more of the visual formats that we're building into Ad Studio later this year. But if you're going to run an ad today, this is what your listeners are going to see. All right, so now when I want to add that audio, if I've run an ad on Ad Studio before, I can just go ahead and re-upload the ad that that has already been produced for me if I liked that one. If not, though, I'm going to write a creative brief to let Spotify know what I want my ad to sound like. So here, there are some fields where I can let Spotify know what I'm promoting and what I want the ad to sound like. So I can say, I'm promoting Spotted Fresh, my meal delivery service, trying to reach folks who would be interested in cooking, 25 to 44. What do I want? I want to sound excited, excited to be able to get fresh meals delivered to me weekly. What do I want them to do after hearing the ad? I want them to come to my Spotted Fresh website and sign up for their first few meals. So there are a few additional fields here where I can let Spotify know generally what do I want the ad to sound like? Are there examples of things that I really like here? If there are specific URLs or promo codes, I can add them here as well. And then I can also select a preference of what the voice actor is going to sound like. So the next steps from here after I submit this are that I'm going to get an ad back within 48 hours that I can review. If I'm happy with the ad, I'm just going to go ahead and press accept, and then that ad's going to run. If I'm not happy with the ad though, then I can provide feedback. So we want to make sure that you're really happy with the quality of the ad. And so let's say that the script was a little off, or the tone wasn't quite right for my brand. I could go ahead and provide that feedback until I get an ad that I'm happy with. All right, so this was the ad creation flow. Now really quickly, I'm going to show you the types of metrics that you'll see after your ad runs in Ad Studio. Oops, sorry, let's move here. All right, so this is a test ad that I ran a few months ago. So you can just see here that this budget here was $1,003. I can see the breakdown of ads that delivered on Spotify via the streaming ad insertion via off Spotify. So about 2/3 of it was on, about 1/3 of it was off. That can vary depending on the audience and the timing of the ad. So this breakdown here is for those ads that were delivered on Spotify. So Rochelle had mentioned that one of the huge values of streaming ad insertion is that everyone who hears that ad is logged into Spotify. We know who they are, and then we can also provide really meaningful data about who heard your ad. So here I can see over my campaign how many impressions were delivered and the reach of those impressions. You see here that the completion rate is not available. That's because this is actually a new feature that we launched really recently. So I can see how many listeners or how many times this ad was played all the way through on platform. So this is a new feature for the more recent ads. And in addition, I can get a breakdown of the audience who heard my ad. So you can see here a breakdown of age, gender, and platform. If I want, I can also export this to a CSV so I can put it into whatever other types of analysis that I'm doing. And yeah, that's it. It's really easy. It's really fun. And I think I'm going to now stop this demo to give you a quick peek at what's coming up next. So are you able to put okay, perfect. You read my mind. What is next for podcast ads in Ad Studio? So go to the next slide, please. Great. So when I showed you the demo earlier, you saw that the preview was going to show the podcast art. Earlier this year, we started launching call to action cards or CTA cards for certain podcast ads. So the experience here is that you can see that in this example, Squarespace is running an ad within a podcast. And then when you're looking at that ad, you see Squarespace's cover art here. There's a call to action on the bottom. So you can see here in this middle image, there's a Squarespace Learn More button that users can engage with. But if I'm hearing this ad when I'm, say, out of focus, if I'm a listener and then my phone is across the room, I'm not going to see this. Call to action cards are pretty amazing because then once I come back to engage with Spotify again, so let's say I want to change to another podcast or tweak the volume, I'm going to see one of these images here on the right. So that's actually a chance for me to re-engage with that ad and then click this call to action button here, this Learn More. We've seen really positive results so far with CTA cards. So they're a really great experience for listeners. Advertisers are seeing really great interaction with them. So super excited to bring this into Ad Studio later this year. So more to come on that when we have the specific timing. All right, so that wraps up my demo. I'm going to hand it back to Rochelle now to finish up this presentation. Then we can get to your Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacey. That was, it's always fun to see Ad Studio in action. So that was great. So finally, as Stacey mentioned, now we're going to talk about incorporating podcast ads into your media mix and how you can do that effectively. So it all comes down to advertiser objectives, right? What are you trying to achieve? What message are you trying to get out there? And what do you want your target audience to do? And what you can see here is a very typical conversion funnel. And we've found that podcast ads are really, really strong for top of funnel objectives. Things like awareness, interest, consideration, just because of that lack of clutter that I talked about previously. You're not having to compete with a bunch of other ads in the environment where you're sharing your message. And we have a highly engaged audience within our Spotify platform. However, looking at the bottom of the funnel, so intent, evaluation, and purchase, podcast ads can also work really well for these lower funnel objectives. We've seen it time and time again with advertisers who keep coming back to capture some of that lower funnel interest and activity. But you need to be careful about the creative that you're putting out there. If you want to actually do well against those types of objectives, then you need to ensure in your creative you have a really strong and clear call to action on what you want the target audience to do. So we've primarily been talking about podcasts here, but we do have a couple different campaign options, which Stacey showed a bit in her demonstration. So when you're doing advertising in music, you do have the option between audio ads and video ads. We have inventory for both of those, and they're both really strong options. Within podcasts, we are currently focused on audio ads. But as Stacey mentioned, we are working on several different formats that will be coming out soon that will create more options for our advertisers in the future. So just a few closing thoughts and ideas. First of all, we find that most of our most successful advertisers look to include both music and podcasts in their campaigns because they do different things. So first of all, it allows you to reach your widest audience if you incorporate both music and podcasts. But people are doing these things for different reasons. So people listen to music in order to feel, and interacting with our listeners over the years, and doing a lot of studies around this, we know that people are listening to music to set a vibe or environment or enhance a moment that they're having, whereas people listen to podcasts to think. As we talked about earlier, the reasons why people are listening to podcasts are to stay up to date or be entertained or learn. And so our tip here is really, we highly recommend using both music and podcasts to get your message out there, but tailoring your creative and message for each environment in order to make it feel like it fits into that environment and is most relevant to the listener in the space that they're in. All right, we have made it here to our audience Q&A. So I am going to pull up, we have a lot of questions, which is awesome. We are not going to have time to address all of these questions, but Stacey and I will do our very best to answer some. I did see a question in here just around budget, which I realized we did not address directly in the presentation. So why don't we kick off with that one? Just minimum budgets for podcast advertising. So for our music advertisings, the minimum budget for a campaign is $250. For podcast, it is $500. So both of them very reasonable rates to get started and test out streaming audio advertising. So we recommend that you definitely get in there and test it out. And then
Rochelle, I think also want to plug that $500 minimum podcast budget includes the creative production fees. So yeah, that creative will come with that $500 budget.
Great point, Stacey. That is free. Exactly. All right. And then another question, we touched on this a little bit, but any additional tips for podcast creative? Stacey, what have you seen work best over the years? Any particular recommendations around podcast creative?
I mean, I would say that really lean into that creative brief that we provide in Ad Studio. Because that information goes directly to our creative production crew, where they're going to be both writing the script as well as recording that creative. So the better that they can really understand what your goals are, who your audience is, how you want that ad to sound. And even if you're not sure, that's okay, but I would really lean into our offering. Our creative production crew is awesome.
Great. And then we do have a question on when podcast advertising will be available in other markets. So currently within Ad Studio, podcast advertising is only available in the US, but we of course have big plans. We want to ensure that we're supporting our creators and advertisers across the world. So we are actively planning right now to expand to additional markets, and we will definitely keep everybody posted on when that will be available. So I'm just trying to get to another. So Stacey, how about this one? As an agency, can we have numerous clients under one account, or do we need individual accounts for each client? We do have a lot of small and medium-sized agencies and even large agencies that operate out of Ad Studio. So do you want to talk about how they do that effectively?
Yep, for sure. You can set up multiple ad accounts if that makes managing your different clients easier. So we do see that a lot of agencies like to set up separate ad accounts for each of their clients or brands. But it is a flexible platform, so you can have that platform work to how you want it. You can add different managers or viewers or admins to each ad account. So there is a lot of flexibility. It's also really easy to switch across ad accounts if you have multiple.
Great. So, and we've gotten a couple of questions about targeting options and capabilities, how they differ between music and podcast, and if we plan on adding any additional targeting options in the future. So Stacey, that sounds right up your alley.
I can take that one. Yeah, our podcast offering is relatively new. We launched last November, and So as you can see in the platform, a lot of the options right now are pretty high level. We really want to make sure that we have enough scale and can reach all the right folks who are listening to podcast. So we do plan to offer more granular and more extensive audience targeting in the future, currently scoping that out. So we'll keep everyone posted about the timing.
Great. And we have time for one more question. So we have so many.
What if I just talk really, really fast? All of the questions?
I don't think it's going to work. So, and then a final question, and then I'll mention how we're going to handle all of the rest of questions, because we definitely want to get to them. The question is just around being able to specify a particular show to advertise on within Ad Studio. So that is not currently available. We really lean into that Spotify advertising network through Ad Studio, or our self-serve platform. If you have a really strong interest in aligning yourself with a particular show or creator, we can certainly put you in touch with our sales team that is able to accommodate that. So that is an option, but not through Ad Studio currently. All right, so we have made it through the Q&A. As I mentioned, of course, we want to answer every question. We have them all documented here. So what we're going to be doing is coming back to you after this session and being sure to follow up and answer all of the questions that came up today. And I think if we can pull up the final slide or two. So this is the end, unfortunately, of our time with you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we've really enjoyed this time together and look forward to following up. As I mentioned, you will be receiving an email tomorrow that includes this presentation and a lot of additional information on how you can reach out with any other questions you might have. In the meantime, before you get that email, feel free to go to our website. It's ads.spotify.com. You can get more information there. And if you'd like to go ahead and register for an account for Ad Studio, you can do that there as well. So thank you again so much for taking the time to spend with me and Stacey today to learn more. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.